The recording. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the Berkshire Football Stories chat podcast with me, Rob Davies. Abi Ticehurst returning from her mid-season break. How are you, Abi?
Hello. I'm okay, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thanks. And unfortunately, Tom Canning's not able to join us today, but fear not, we have not one but two replacements for him in the term of special guests. First of all, making a return to the pod, Bob Bacon, after a successful stint last week, has been backed by unanimous popular demand. Bob, how are you?
Good, thank you very much.
Good. And we also have Robbie Stelling from Newbury Today. Robbie, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the pod.
Bringing in the big guns today, Rob. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely brilliant. So, as you might expect, we might have a bit more weight towards our West Berkshire football teams this week. So, but there's plenty to talk about in that area and plenty to talk about around the rest of the county as well. So, fear not, we'll still be covering the best of the fixtures and results that are upcoming. And we start, because we've got a lot to talk about, we'll start with the Bucks and Berks Cup quarterfinals from last night. The final two quarterfinals were played. We had mixed bag for our Berkshire sides. First of all, Hungerford losing 3-2 at home to Marlow, but we'll start with the positives, and that was a big win. Bracknell 2-1 victors over Wycombe Wanderers. Bob, these results for Bracknell, they just keep coming and coming, don't they? They have another special result, another big game at home, and another big night for the Bracknell fans.
Yeah, they like a big game, don't they?
They do indeed.
I thought it was great last night because they've put some of the kids into the squad as well, which shows some real progression, which is very pleasing. And plus the fact with Grant getting back on the score sheet now and scoring 2 early goals, I mean that's the way to play league in quote opposition and get the job done. So fair play to them, well done.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Abi, last year Ascot faced the same opposition in the same competition, a stage later actually in the semi-finals. How does sort of a big game like this, what does that do for the club in general? Because I mean, getting the people through the gate for a match like this really sort of boosts the profile of the club, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It was massive for Ascot. Having Wycombe at home, it drew a big crowd in and just made the atmosphere incredible. Louis Bowers' winning penalty is forever on show in the clubhouse. It's a great photo, to be fair, and I'm sure if you ask Louis about it, he'll wax lyrical about it a million times. But yeah, no, it's fantastic. Yeah, they obviously have a good following themselves, so bringing a big crowd down makes a real difference to a club. And it's just, semi-finals aren't for everyone.
No. Well, Bracknell will be facing MK Dons in the semi-final. Currently, that's actually due to be played at MK Dons, but as is the way with this competition, that fixture might get reversed, although I feel that Bracknell might struggle to fit it into their schedule at the moment because there's a lot of games due to be played at Bottom Meadow, both with Sandhurst and Bracknell's games to go. And we should also mention something we haven't necessarily... We've focused so much on their big cup games that Bracknell have been in phenomenal form in the league. They lost this weekend, just gone, but that before that, they've taken 31 points from their previous 12 games, which is pretty incredible, to be fair. And it's left them in the playoff places, and they're still looking good for a playoff spot with a lot of games still to come, it has to be said. But unfortunately, the quarterfinals didn't go according to plan for both Berkshire sides. Hungerford gave up a 2-0 half-time lead to end up losing 3-2 in the last minute to Marlow. Robbie, perhaps you could give us a little bit of an insight of that. What happened to Hungerford last night?
It was a funny old game, to be honest. I think, first and foremost, it was probably a game that Hungerford could have done without, given where they are in the league. They've had a real resurgence in the National League South, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on. But they've had a bit of bad news in the week with some injuries. A couple of their strikers who have made a massive difference are out injured. But it was I wouldn't maybe say a much changed Hungerford side, but it was sort of semi wholesale changes, if you like, from the team that's been turning out in the league. But they started the game pretty well. It wasn't a classic. There wasn't a lot of pretty football. It wasn't much to get the spectators excited about necessarily, but a couple of goals in the first half. Stefan Illich scored the first one, his first goal for Hungerford. It was just a long hoof over the top from the goalkeeper, Jed Ward. He did really well. It was a nice left-footed finish. And then their brand new signing, Great Evans, great by name, great by nature. Hungerford fans will be very much hoping. He scored just a tap in after his initial shot was saved. And at half time, it looked as though Hungerford had more than one foot in the semi-final, to be totally honest. And it actually looked that way up until 75 odd minutes when Marlow scored a free kick to bring themselves back in the game. And even then, I was watching and I didn't really feel like there was a route back in the game for Marlow, naively, obviously. And you have to say fair play to them because they stuck at it. You could hear just from listening to their shouts and conversations within the game that they never gave up and they never let their head drop. That they didn't create much until the last 10, 15 minutes. But, one goal, suddenly it changes the shape of the game, doesn't it? And Hungerford sat back a little bit. And the second goal, I think Jed Ward, who's been fantastic for Hungerford on loan in goal this season, he's barely put a foot wrong. Probably should have saved the second one. I think it's just about the first mistake he's made all season. I think he's got a really good future in the game. I think he could easily play Football League. So it's a shame to see him make a mistake. And then a last-minute winner, always difficult one to be on the end of, always sweet for the opposition as well. And I think it was Junaid Bell, who was actually on loan on trial at Hungerford, in the summer. So I'm sure that was a nice feeling for him. I saw him, embrace Danny Robinson at the start of the game. So clearly there are no hard feelings there. And he's a nice player, technically very good, diminutive in stature, which I think maybe was what put Hungerford off him. But disappointing. Obviously, it's disappointing. No one likes to lose a game of football, and you never like to lose in that manner, certainly. I think Hungerford would have obviously loved to play Reading. That's a great tie, isn't it? But, I think their priorities inevitably lie elsewhere with the league.
Yeah. As you say, Marlow now move on to play Reading in the other semi-finals. So good luck to them in the competition going forward. But as you
celebrate a last-minute winner like Marlow either, because one thing you can all say about them, Mark Bartley will get those guys working, literally through to the last minute, won't he?
Yeah, he did. I think he was sent off last night for some protestations. Actually, I was on the other side of the ground, so thankfully, probably I didn't hear what he said, and I'm sure I wouldn't be able to repeat it on this podcast, even if I had. But yeah, like you say, he was really, driving them forwards, and the whole group that you felt like there was a really good spirit there, which is obviously massive at any level of football.
Absolutely, yeah. And as you mentioned, Bob, Marlow being very competitive in the Isthmian South Central, the same division as Binfield and Thatcham. They've been sort of in around the playoff picture for a couple of seasons now. So testament to the attitude that Mark Bartley's installed there, and having come from the level below, they've really taken to that division well, and probably should look like a sort of a club that others around this area could look to emulate. Would that you say that's fair?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I mean, the fact that they've beaten a side that's 2 divisions above them is real testimony to their spirit. And certainly, when you go to their home ground, you don't get any favours, and when you play them at home, you're going to be in a fight. So,
fair play indeed. Well, Robbie, you mentioned there that Hungerford have been on a little bit of a resurgence or a little resurgence streak recently. Unfortunately, a narrow defeat to Worthing at the weekend, but before that they'd had 3 league wins on the bounce, and they turned what looked like a season that was almost sort of drifting away into a relegation campaign into one that looks a little bit more like there's a little bit more competition now. They might see some light at the end of the tunnel and have a bit of optimism amongst the Hungerford Town fans. Is that fair to say?
Very much so, yeah. I think optimism is the perfect word for it. It's been a long, difficult season for them. They lost Ryan Seeger and Sol Wanjao-Smith in the summer, who scored, a good majority of their goals and created a good majority of their chances. And that was kind of the story of the first half of the season, in truth. Just a lack of a goal scorer. They went through 3 or 4 different strikers. And actually, the performance level was decent enough. I mean, they lost so many games by the odd goal, 1-0, 2-1. It's hard to think of a game where they were really outplayed. I think they lost 4-1 at Havant and Waterlooville early on in the season. But other than that, I think it was 1 goal in pretty much every game. But, it's a difficult thing. If you don't have a goal scorer, Hungerford just go to show how difficult it can be. And it becomes difficult mentally as well. I think, you sit back and you try and defend for your lives. And it was difficult the first half of the season. But I don't feel like the optimism necessarily ever dissipated completely from within the fans because of the high level of performances. There was always that sense that, if they could bring in a goal scorer, then a decent run was just around the corner. And so it's proved, like you say, that they've won the last 3 at home. And they've won a couple of them really well as well. St Albans, that they beat 3-0. I think they beat Hampstead 3-0 as well. And a lot of that's been down to a couple of acquisitions in Dan Roberts, who has come in on loan from Dartford, scored quite a few goals for Slough previously, and he's made a real difference. Brings people into the game, is pretty good in the air, and is a decent finisher as well at this level. And I think he's scored 4 or 5 goals, and he's been a real positive addition. And then they signed David Bramang, who is another front man, 22, 23, fairly young, I think, well built, sort of can play that lone number 9 role and can play it well. Had a spell at Crawley, I think, previously. And he came in and absolutely hit the ground running. He scored 4 goals in his first 4 games. And as you can see, you mentioned the run and the results there. That's been fundamental to Hungerford's improvement, those goals. Unfortunately, looking ahead, or you mentioned the defeat on the weekend. They were without Bramang. He's out for the season. He suffered an anterior cruciate ligament injury. Just about the worst injury you can suffer in football, isn't it? He went off on Tuesday night, so that's the end of his season. Dan Roberts played on Saturday. He had a hamstring injury that kept him out for a couple of weeks. And he was only half fit at best. I think if they'd had a fully fit number 9, they might well have got something from that game at the weekend. I was chatting on the terrace last night, and he's broken his finger now, to add insult to quite literal injury. So that's going to keep him out for another 2 or 3 weeks. So looking ahead, the challenge that Hungerford faced at the start of the season seems to be the one that they're going to face in the run-in. But, they have that massive thing called momentum, and that can really count for a lot. And they're in the market. Great Evans, I mentioned, he scored last night in the Bucks and Bucks Cup game. He's a striker signed from Kingstonian, so they'll be hoping that he's going to provide some goals. And I think crucially now they're in touch with the chasing pack. They're off the bottom. Felt for a long time like they were rooted to the bottom. And I think Christmas and New Year, I think the gap was about 10 points. I think it's 4 points now, 4 points from Cheshunt, with a game in hand on them as well. So look, anything's possible. It's such a cliche in football, but the last 10, 15 games, teams that are at the bottom end of the table can beat teams at the top end, and Hungerford have to play some of the teams in and around them as well. So yeah, I think optimism, definitely. All hope certainly is not lost.
Well, that's a positive note to sort of end on the Hungerford chat. And we'll be keeping an eye on them for the rest of the season. And hopefully they can continue this good run of form and force their way out of the relegation zone. Because, we've always liked Danny Robinson here and always like to keep an eye on Hungerford. And as you mentioned, Dan Roberts coming over, has played at Slough previously, played at Windsor as well. And, there's a lot of good links to the rest of this side of Berkshire as well. So hopefully Hungerford can continue this momentum and push their way on up the leagues.
Yeah, very much so. It's my first full season covering them as well, and I'm conscious that especially in the office, I'm going to get the blame if they go down an unlucky charm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they would be looking so good before that, so maybe there's something in it. So yeah, very good. Right, we'll leave Hungerford there, and we're going to shift across to Reading Women, because Abi, I think you'll actually have something reasonably positive to say about them this week. They managed to get through the fifth round of the FA Cup on penalties, the second victory on penalties they've had in a row after beating Leicester in the fourth round. And they're into the quarterfinals, the first time in, I believe it's 4 years. How you were at the game? How did it go?
I mean, both Reading teams won this weekend, so I have to be happy about something at least. It wasn't the greatest of matches. I mean, like you said, it went to penalties. So something Robbie said actually about needing a proven goal scorer, that is exactly Reading's issue that remains. And I think actually the fact that Beth England was cup-tied, considering she's come from Chelsea, meant that Tottenham also didn't have their proven goal scorer. So it was very much two teams struggling to score. It was a very centrally played game, I think, and a lot of knocking it back and forth, and then not much beyond that. Although I will say that Rachel Rowe was just Rachel Rowe, and she's sensational, and she really does need, like, she is the link up, and she is the one who transitions it through the phases of play, and she just doesn't have anyone to dink it on the end to, essentially. So that is slightly disappointing. But I will give my props to new signing Esther May Kith. She made her debut in Sunday's game. She played at a centre-back and she was sensational. I think last time I talked about Reading, I talked about the fact that we kind of were missing that dogged spirit that we used to have when we had sort of Fishlock and Harding in the centre. And while she was a defender rather than a midfielder, she was, just sensational to watch. Just won every ball she'd lost, was really solid defensively for us. But also, I think she's quite keen to push up a little bit as well. So she's happy to make a little bit of a run into the midfield, but she's equally good at tracking back in the times when we were having to defend. So, it was a little bit disappointing that we didn't see goals in 120 minutes. But I did take my friend with me as well. And I said, generally speaking, like, penalties aren't great. Like, we've not been great at penalties, but we scored 5 sensational penalties, some real, like, back of the net ripplers as well.
Really the penalties though, Abi.
Pardon?
Did you watch all the penalties?
I did, yes. Unlike you, Bob, I don't mind watching a penalty shootout.
Still can't watch them.
So 5 really, really decent penalties, and actually. Drew Spence stepped up for Tottenham first, and it was only because it kind of rattled off the side post and kind of rolled behind Grace Maloney. She couldn't quite get a hand to it that she even scored that goal. So Grace Maloney proving herself as a shot stopper once again, really, in that.
Very good. And how do you feel about the Reading season in general? Is the FA Cup here a nice respite, because suddenly Reading look a little bit less secure at the top end? It was all sort of not necessarily going particularly well in the league, but they always had kind of Leicester to rely on, who were sort of a little bit cut adrift. But Leicester have strung some wins together, and now Reading just a point above the bottom spot. How are you feeling about the season in general?
Nervous. Very nervous. I don't think it helps that we've now drawn Chelsea in the next round of the FA Cup. That was great, brilliant. The thing is as well that up next it's West Ham, and I was talking to Ben Waite about this the other day. They are notoriously our bogey team. We always look like we could potentially beat them, and then sometimes I think we only ever draw or they smash us. So it's been and they were the last to knock us out the FA Cup as well. So and then beyond that, it's Arsenal up next. So I think when you asked me how many points you think we could get from the next few games, I think I might have said 3 maybe. And I think that looks even more desperate at this point, especially because after that Chelsea FA Cup game, it's then Brighton and then Leicester. And so they are, I mean, cliche to say, but 6 pointers, aren't they? So, I think it's squeaky bum time, isn't it, for Reading at this point, really? And like you say, Leicester have strung a few wins together. They did this last season as well. They had a bit of a good run, which kept them up, and that's what bumped Birmingham down last season. I think they seem to be doing that again. Brighton I think they're realising that they're down in the bottom half of the table in relegation scrap as well. So they're looking for some points in places. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting few weeks, I think.
Mm-hmm. One to keep an eye on there for sure. Now, before we have our before we end the part one, something, Bob, you wanted to chat about briefly, at least in the chat you mentioned earlier, was the government's white paper on a sustainable future of forming football governments. It's a white paper the government has brought out about a week ago now, saying with the ambition that it sets out the government's comprehensive plan to introduce an independent regulator for professional clubs in the English football pyramid. What do you make of this, and how do you think it will affect clubs further down the divisions?
Briefly, could be a bit dangerous, but I'm all for an independent football regulator. I think it makes sense. There are too many clubs now struggling to survive on income through the gates. Too many, and there's only so many people with wealth that can put in for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons. And football needs to be able to have some form of regulation. Now, I know that the Premier League are going to be encouraged to push money down the pyramid. My view of that is that if you know anything about gardening, if you got your roots well prepared, you got a strong tree. And I think that if the money is only directed at the top end or Championship or League One, League Two, I think that's a bit of a failure. And I certainly would like some form of regulation or help. And I think I do believe it's really help that could be directed or driven through county FAs, that county FAs could effectively take charge and help some of the clubs out, give them advice to how to financially structure themselves. VAT, as we all know, is an absolute nightmare with clubs, and clubs can get into a mess with that. And then you find some clubs that are having to pay off big debts, like Southend are just having to do now. I believe that's all settled though. And then you get the wealth warriors like Wrexham in the conference that seem to be just blithely carrying on. But just some form of independence to review that makes it equitable for all, so that everybody can learn. And I think if clubs have finance directors or CEOs that want to lay out their stall and be proper and build a solid base, that can only be good for the future of the game. But I think if it finishes at League Two, I do think that's a bit of a mess, and it needs to go a little bit lower.
Absolutely. Is there any immediate regulation you'd look at in non-league that would potentially improve the matters of clubs, other than obviously just a general oversight? Is there anything in particular you could suggest from that part?
I think balancing income to expenditure across the board, and dare I say that in some leagues, players are being paid probably a little bit more than their clubs can afford, and clubs are hoping for more crowds, clubs are hoping for better sponsorship, and then the player moves on somewhere else. And just to get to grips with this income versus expenditure.
Absolutely. I mean, how would Robbie, I'll bring you in on this briefly before we go into the break, but I mean, how a club like Hungerford, I mean, we had Hungerford's outgoing chairman, Patrick Chambers, on the pod maybe about a year ago now, and he was mentioning about the budget constraints they had or Hungerford have compared to other teams in the league. I mean, for a club like Hungerford, how do they have to try and compete with the teams in their league, like say Dartford, Ebbsfleet, who seem to have much higher budgets and skew the division in their favour? Yeah,
well, it's very difficult, isn't it? Hungerford, like you say, are a small club for the level. This is the highest level they've ever been at, and although they've been there for a succession of seasons now, I don't think it would be unfair to say that for the size of the club, they're punching above their weight. actually with Patrick and Nikki at the helm, they're fortunate that they've been very well run. I think that they're pretty sustainable, that they are fairly self-sufficient, even though they have a small gate for the league, probably 300 to 600. And that makes it very difficult, like you say, to compete with some of the big hitters in the league. And having lost Ryan Seeger in the summer, and I think Ryan Seeger's wages were paid by a sort of conglomeration of Hungerford fans and followers, if you like. So it's difficult then. How do you replace a striker of his caliber with a budget that is not necessarily competitive for the league? And, Bob said it there. You always run the risk. People will chance their arm on paying slightly more than they can afford. Like Bob said, to get more people through the gates, perhaps to get a promotion. Really, you can look at almost any level of football, and you can see that teams have got themselves into trouble doing that. So I think it's really important that there is a way of regulating it. I agree with Bob when he says that when the Premier League talks about pushing money down, that's massive. That needs to happen. But I think that there needs to be a way of monitoring it and making sure that it does happen as well. I think we've heard time and again, people always talk about the importance of grassroots football and the importance of non-league football, not just for the people in the communities that they serve, but for the game in England as a whole as well. We talk about the Jamie Vardys, the Chris Smallings that have come right through the ranks, and the English game is so much richer for that, isn't it? And the English game is so much richer for teams like Hungerford as well. I think it's really important that teams, not just in this area, teams across the country are supported and protected, because we're seeing too many teams fall in hard times, and some even fall by the wayside at the moment.
Absolutely. Wise words indeed, and hopefully something will come of this regulator and this white paper. But as you say, it would be good to have a little bit more of a control perhaps on the lower leagues as well. We'll leave it there for part one, and we'll be back after these messages.
Hello, everybody. Lovely part one there. Well done, guys. I am just going to deliver a couple of sponsorship messages and then I will disappear again. We are sponsored. Football in Berkshire's Berkshire Football Stories podcast is sponsored by Ticket Pass. They are an ethical alternative to a ticketing industry that often puts profit before greed. That doesn't make any sense. Greed before profit. None of this makes any sense. I'm reading it wrong. Let's start again. This is going to look really good on the video when it goes out tomorrow. Ticket Pass provides an ethical alternative to a ticketing industry that often profits from greed. There we go. That's better. Our platform is an all-in-one solution for creating events, buying and selling tickets, live streaming, and keeping events in a safe space. So there's that bit. Let's also talk about the Curious Academy, which is a digital skills hub in central Reading. They provide sales academy, digital skills and data analytics training, and are all about creating positive outcomes specifically and particularly for young people. They have a real focus on that. They also have a focus on older people, and they are just looking to build people's confidence to be able to get back into work. So that is really great. They give us a few quid to help us pay to put this podcast on to help run the website. So thank you to both the Curious Academy and to Ticket Pass. Over to you, Rob.
Brilliant. Hope you enjoyed those messages, and welcome back to part two. We're going to begin part two with a chat about a side we haven't mentioned perhaps enough so far this season, and that's Thatcham. Thatcham sort of started the season a little bit probably down the lower ends of the table, which is why we didn't speak about them as much. But since the turn of the year, they've been almost undefeated. They last lost a game on January the 2nd, and that run has seen them climb to 10th in the table with an outside shot of the playoffs, perhaps. Robbie, what is behind this uptick in performance from the Thatcham Town players?
Yeah, it's been fantastic. 10 unbeaten now. I mentioned that it's my first full season covering these teams. You can imagine how I was feeling at the turn of the year with Hungerford, rock bottom, Thatcham in all sorts of trouble as well. And to be fair, having watched them and followed them first half of the season, I thought they were in trouble. Not just because of their league position. Really, they struggled for a goal scorer, similarly to Hungerford, but they were struggling defensively as well. They lost Jack Hopwood, their goalkeeper, midway through, or maybe a quarter of the way through the season. They had a guy in on loan from Reading, David Nyarko, who came in and scored a few goals. They lost him and struggled to replace him initially. But since the turn of the year, they've done a lot of good business. I would say first and foremost, Yashwar Romeo is tireless in his pursuit of new players. He certainly keeps me busy writing about them. I feel like every week I'm researching 3 or 4 new signings through the door, which is often the way at this level. And as they're proving at the moment, it can be effective. That they've brought in Jordan Alves and Harry Williams in the forward areas who have come in and made a difference. Not just providing goals. I think they've come in and added to the team with their general performance as well, creating chances, bringing other players into the game. But I think I'd be doing Romeo and the team a disservice if I didn't say that actually some of the players that were there earlier in the season when they were struggling have massively improved. And that's obviously credit to their own mentality and credit to the coaches as well. Cameron Rohart-Brown, he was playing further back. He was playing right back a lot of the time earlier on in the season. He's moved forward and he's been excellent. He's scored a number of goals since moving further forward. Mo Cisse in the middle of the park has been very useful at both ends, up and down the pitch. And they recruited a new goalkeeper in Toby Fisher, I think a player that Romeo knows fairly well. And he's done well as well. I think 5 clean sheets in the last 10 games, those 10 games unbeaten. And, sorry to roll out another cliche, but if you're not going to win a game, make sure you don't lose it. And that's what they've done. They've become really hard to beat. And if you can be hard to beat and you have a little bit more quality, the quality that they were lacking earlier in the season in those midfield and forward areas, you always give yourself a chance. And it's been a miraculous turnaround, actually. I spoke about Hungerford in the first part. Always felt like that they might just be one win or one goal scorer around the corner from going on a good run as they have. Thatcham, I never quite felt that, actually. It always felt like they were a little bit further away, but they've done sensationally, and I'm very happy to be surprised by them in such a fashion. Yash Romeo is a great guy, first and foremost, and most importantly, always extremely generous with his time and insight. And obviously, we love to see our local teams doing well. And you mentioned they're at the top of the park. They're in with an outside chance of the playoffs now. And around Christmas time, that was beyond the realms of possibility, to be fair. And it is an outside chance. But isn't it great that we're even having that conversation? Teams, you love to be involved at the right end of the table. And to their immense credit, that's what it looks like. It looks far more likely that they're going to be challenging for the playoffs and they're going to be having to look over their shoulder as we approach the run-in.
I've seen them twice this year. Once on the fateful, the deep dark night down at Thatcham when they played Binfield when the managers resigned. And Thatcham were awful. They were all over the shop. I mean, it was 4-0 to Binfield. It could have been 7-8. Players playing in strange positions, very little discipline. And when they came back to Binfield, they were so much better organised, both going forward and going back. And when they lost the ball, they got into, dare I say, get into their shape very early, and they were very quick at doing that. But I thought they were very progressive going forward as well, which was complete contrast to the game down at Thatcham. Yeah.
I think actually you hit the nail on the head there with the first half of the season. There was a real lack of organisation, lack of structure, and you've got to get your fundamentals in place before you can go and be expansive and play the kind of football that you want to play. Because if you've got a general sense of chaos out on the pitch, it's always going to be difficult. And fair play to them, they've done really well to turn it around, because it's not easy when things aren't going well. To come in and inject a bit of life and make a difference. They've done brilliantly well with, like I say, with the players that they brought in, but also the players that were there at the start of the season as well.
It'll be a good game this Saturday. They're playing the people who beat Binfield last night, Hamworth Villa. And
Yes,
that will be a very, very good game to watch.
Yeah, it's be a tough one to call. Obviously, Thatcham are on a good run. I was speaking to Yash Romeo after the weekend where they didn't, I think they're a bit disappointed to only come away with a point from Bedford Sports. We'll see that they've certainly got a run to protect, but Hamworth obviously had a real good result last night. So
yeah, two sides that are in decent form and two sides in that sort of playoff. Potential playoff group, shall we say, looking up at the table there. So, yeah, Thatcham's certainly a side to keep an eye on as the season progresses. We certainly can't get out of today without mentioning that Maidenhead United, and they're talking of teams that are having sort of uptick in forms. Maidenhead United have won their last 3 games to leave them 9 points clear of the relegation zone. 3 tricky fixtures, 3 narrow victories, and Maidenhead started to throw some results together at the right time of the season to get out of the relegation scrap. They're still obviously not home and hosed yet. They'll need to continue the decent form throughout the season, but they're looking decent. And Bob, I'm not sure you've seen much of Maidenhead this season. I think it's mainly Binfield at Step 4 you looked at, but they're doing what they've done on the last couple of seasons, and I mean it's pretty incredible, really, when you think about it. Again, we're talking about a lot about sides with one of the lower budgets in whatever division they happen to be in. Again, and over the last couple of seasons that they've been in the National League, they've always just seemed to manage to pull it out of the bag. It's pretty impressive, really. Would you agree?
3 games, 3 wins in a row, up to 14th place. That's great momentum. Not sure how the momentum will be this week, because if I've got it right, they're playing Wrexham, aren't they?
Yeah, Wrexham at home. Yeah.
So that could be an intimidating place for Wrexham, which we hope it is. And I kind of feel Maidenhead have got a surprise in them somewhere along the line. Dev's got them playing to win a game, and it was a good win for them on Saturday against quite a tough opposition. So fair play to them. They've got some momentum now, and I really hope that it continues for them, because I think they deserve it. They work so hard.
They seem to have found a decent player in Reece Smith, who I've seen them fairly recently, and they seem to, well, at least when they're away, line up in a 4-3-3 with Emile Aqua through the middle, who's getting a couple of goals at the moment, and Reece Smith being one of those, a young lad who's actually quite local. He's from Wokingham originally, playing on the on one of those wide forward positions, and he's a real live wire at the moment, a real sort of adding a bit to the side. And I think finding him, and they've uncovered a couple of gems again, and they're looking fairly solid at the back as well. A few options in centre back. Massey isn't always playing now. He's been a part of that team for so long, and you thought he'd go on forever, but they have plenty. They have other options at centre back now, and maybe a little bit of depth for the first time in a couple of seasons at Maidenhead. Very good. But it's not just the Maidenhead men's side that have had an uptick in fortunes recently. The Maidenhead women's team throughout February, they had a narrow defeat at the weekend, but before that they had won 2 and drawn 1 of their last 3 games. And that has taken them clear of the relegation zone as well. They're currently, I haven't got the table in front of me, just outside the relegation zone with games in hand and looking pretty handy. And Abi, you saw them play midweek, is that correct?
I did indeed. I don't often get to watch much women's games these days, given I am now an Ascot faithful. So I thought I'd dabble in a little bit of Thursday night football. So I headed down to York Road. They're playing Swindon Town, which I think probably in the last couple of seasons, they've not been a game that they've really wanted to play. Swindon are quite... I don't want to say aggressive. They're not an aggressive team, but they're hardworking and they'll give you a good game. And so maybe not a game that they would have wanted a couple of seasons ago, but actually, given they're in this good form right now, it was a 0-0, which is obviously a bit disappointing to go on and watch on a Thursday night. But actually, I think that was a fair reflection of the game, both sides. And it wasn't for a lack of chances either. Both sides really going for it, but actually a credit to both their goalkeepers. Gemma Harvey at Maidenhead, who won our Young Player of the Season award last season, actually. She was fantastic, but Swindon Towns were their keeper. She was equally fantastic. I think it's obviously they've had a few management changes in the last two or so seasons, and so I think now we're at the point where it's clicked for Ed and his coaching staff with them. They're playing some really, really nice football, and they've made some good signings this season as well. Imogen Fisher in the middle, she's fantastic. She's really, really good at controlling the game. I think she's just got the right kind of pace to and the right flow within her to really command the game, and she's good at switching kind of directions of the play as well. So she's good at picking up, and she's also a pretty dab hand at having a shot at goal as well. She was quite unlucky at one point, actually. I think it hit the crossbar, one of her shots. So Ines Cipriano as well down the right wing. She's got a little bit of pace on her as well, which is exciting. She's good with her feet. So I think they've made some really good signings in terms of their younger players, and they're complementing their more experienced core group that have been there for a while really well. So yeah, I think they picked up good points from the teams who are around them. So winning over Chelsea and Portishead, and I think that crucial win over Lark Hall as well is what really lifted them off the bottom spot, like around the relegation zone. So I think actually there's obviously, you never know what might happen, but I think for the rest of the season they're looking fairly comfortable. I think there's only probably 4 or 5 games left of the season for them, and I think they're looking fairly maybe not confident, but they're, I think, fairly comfortable at this point, and I think they've done just enough to keep themselves outside of that worry at the bottom spots at this point.
Well, they're currently 4 points and 2 places above the relegation zone, but this weekend they travel to Keynsham Town, the team who are directly below them. So a win there could really separate them from the bottom 3. So good luck to Maidenhead United. Hopefully they can get the result and pull even further away from trouble. Good. Well, we're going to, as we've got Robbie here, we're going to talk about another team we haven't really spoken about too much this season. Newbury are flying high in the Hellenic League Division 2 East. Now, not necessarily a team we cover too much, especially since they've sort of moved over that way. Why don't you give us the lowdown on Newbury, Robbie? Tell us a bit about them and how they're going in their division.
Yeah, you mentioned it there on the pitch. They've been absolutely flying. I think it's 11 wins from 11 in the Hellenic League Division 2 East. They are still in the Berks and Bucks as well. They play their next round in time. I think they are 3 matches away from a potential final there. So it's been going great guns. They've been prolific going forward. George Armstrong, who they signed in the summer, has scored 18 goals. Will Frank, a very recent recruit, I think they signed him just last month. He scored 5 goals in his first 2 games. So they certainly haven't had any problems going forward. And defensively, they've been solid as a rock as well. I don't think they conceded a goal for the first 6 or 7 league games of the season. So it's all been going fantastically on the pitch. And you kind of touched on it there. They are unfortunately playing out of the way. The club, the town would love to be playing in Newbury, and I'm fairly new to the situation, and I could probably sit here for an hour, and don't worry, I'm not going to. I could probably sit here for an hour and try and explain it to you, and I probably wouldn't be able to make head or tail of it. And I think that actually sums it up. I think it's a confusing and slightly difficult situation to get your head around. From the point of view of the club and the town, they would love to be back on home turf. Newbury's a big town, I think, deserving of a decent sized club, and I think there probably would be interest there. They're in Lambourne at the moment. Lambourne are going to have a second team next season, which means that Newbury are looking for another home. Never easy, is it? It can be going as well as it possibly can on the pitch, and I think that really is the case for Newbury this season. But you always have that sort of grim reaper hanging over your shoulder. Danny Langford, who's been fairly central to a lot of what they've done this season. He's driven a lot of the changes off the pitch in terms of the initial move to Lambourne, recruitment of players, coaching, just the organisation of the fixtures. He has stepped down a couple of weeks ago. So that's an interesting one. You can maybe read between the lines a little bit there. And yeah, that probably just about sums it up. On the pitch, fantastic. Off the pitch, difficult, not disastrous, difficult, I think. And hopefully they're gonna find a solution. I think that the key is once they have a home for next season, wherever that may be, I think it's about somewhere where they can set up shop, and then you can start to plan for the following season. And obviously they've got a number of games left still. They'd love to wrap up that Hellenic League title. They would love to go deep in the Bucks and Bucks Cup, but it's difficult for the players as well. I'm sure they probably have one eye on next season. What are we going to be doing? Where are we going to be playing? Should we look elsewhere? Do we want to stick with this club, which I'm sure, given the success they've had, they would love to if possible, but only if possible. You have to bear in mind that some of the players are travelling much bigger distances than they'd ideally like, given that the ground is in Lambourne at the moment. So let's hope they can find a solution there. But other than that, on the pitch, it's all smiles at the moment. Lots of goals and lots of clean sheets to be reporting on in the Newbury News. Very much so. Very
good. I mean, a symptom of this, I guess, is the fact they're in the Hellenic Division 2 East. Division 2 East. Yeah. That's a division that there isn't necessarily promotion out of. It's not part of the Football League structure as such. So winning that league doesn't necessarily mean you'll be playing at a higher level next year. But I guess that's just a symptom of where they are. They have to be in this division, so they can't plan necessarily further down the track because of the situation off the pitch, and so they find themselves here. And we've seen with teams in the area, you can only tread water for so long before you need to actually set out a stall. And it sounds from what you're saying that there might be some hope of that next season.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think you make a good point there. There's scope for the town and the team to play much higher. There are plenty of people I'm sure that would be interested, even if you think about people that maybe go and follow Hungerford and Thatcham. I'm sure they would be interested in going to follow Newbury as well. I mean, it's, as is so often the case, there's often renewed spurts of optimism, sort of tempered with the occasional trough and the occasional bit of bad news. It's a lot of hard work. I think these guys are doing it for the love of the game, aren't they? They're playing, they're working hard behind the scenes because they love it, because they love their teammates. They love the sport of football, which is obviously wonderful. But I think we have to keep in mind that the people putting in the hours behind the scenes, they have lives away from football as well, which is obviously completely understandable, and that does make it more difficult. But I think that there's certainly reason to be positive. Away from the pitch as well as on it, and really, I'd be guessing if I told you, what I expected the future to look like for Newbury. But let's hope that it's going to be a positive one, because it's a really nice club, nice people, and yeah, fingers crossed for their success.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, there's one club we have to mention. If we're talking Thames Valley League. The Thames Valley Premier League, the division Newbury were in last season, actually. But one Berkshire club have been setting that division on fire all season, and they finally secured promotion this weekend. Yateley United win the Thames Valley Premier League. Said secured promotion. That isn't actually secured yet. They've won the championship. With 16 wins from 16 games, an absolutely phenomenal season so far. They wrapped it up this weekend with a 4-3 victory over third place Burfield, a thriller of a game down at Sean Deborah Park. And so they have 4 more games left this season to see if they can complete a 100% league season. And then we just have to wait to see if their application for promotion from step 7 is accepted or not. Very quickly, Rob, I mean, what a phenomenal season from Yateley. And they seem to be playing such a high standard of football for step 7.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, to get promotion in February is a bit special. Some of the wins that they've had have been brilliant, and as you say, the game at the weekend, that sort of closeness of game can only be good for people that go and watch, and when all's said and done, these teams are playing in front of spectators, and spectators get the bug, and then they want to come back for more, and then they're going to expect more, and I think it gives the club a lovely platform to build on.
Absolutely, yeah. Like I say, the promotion from Step 7 to Step 6 is elective, so one club from the Thames Valley Premier League can go up from that division to Step 6, presumably the Combined Counties Division 1 next season, but it's all based on ground grading. So you apply, you are assessed, and then you are potentially promoted based on your league position. You have to finish in the top 5, but if there's someone placed higher than you who also want to go for promotion, they have first priority. But obviously, Yateley don't have to worry about anyone finishing above them, so they've completed that part. It's just whether they are past the ground grading, and we wait to hear on that. They may well be playing Step 6 football next season.
Can I just say one thing on that as well?
Go.
Well, not on the promotion, but just on Yateley as a team in general. They've got, I think, our theme of this podcast seems to be proven goal scorers, doesn't it? But I think they've got their proven goal scorer in Charlie Westall. I think he's got 14 and 17 or something. But actually, I think it's testament to the team. And obviously, the reason why they've won 16 and 16 is because there seems to be so many goal scorers across the team. I think pretty much sort of 70-80% of the team have been on the score sheets at some point this evening. So I think that's probably a big part of why they've been so successful this season.
Absolutely. Fantastic stuff. And we'll look to hear what happens to them as the season is completed. Right. Well, we've had a bumper pod today, and normally we sort of look a bit ahead in a bit more detail towards the weekends and the fixtures beyond that. But we're running slightly short on time. So what we'll do is we'll just ask every one of our contributors here to pick out a fixture that they're looking forward to this weekend, and say where their attention will be drawn. So, Robbie, why don't we start with you? You're our primary guest here. Why don't you pick out a fixture for this weekend?
Primary guest. I like the sound of that, Rob. Thanks very much. I'm going to have to go with Hungerford. That's the team that I tend to follow most in the area. They turn their attention back to the league this weekend. They've got a big week coming up, actually. They're at home to Welling this weekend. Welling are, I think, down in 15th in the league, lost 3 of their last 5. So that looks to be a winnable game. And the reason that it's going to be so interesting is, to return again to that theme of proven goal scorers. How are Hungerford going to cope without their two recognised strikers? I think, I mentioned at the top of the show, there's been a little bit of movement in the transfer window. I think in the transfer market, rather. I think there might be another one come in through the doors at Bullpit Lane before Saturday. So that will be really interesting to see. And they play second place Dartford in the week. So you're thinking that home game on Saturday is going to be maybe unfair to say a must win, but it certainly wouldn't do them any harm. And a good performance and a good result it has got to be on the agenda very much there. And why not? They're on a very good run of form. So let's hope so. Great.
So Hungerford versus Welling at Bullpit Lane. Robbie's pick. Bob, we'll come to you next. Which game have you got your eye on this weekend?
So I'm going for goals this week. I hope. Berks County are playing Hounslow. Hounslow are bottom of the league, and Hounslow have only scored 29 goals, but they have conceded 85. And,
okay.
I'm hoping that Berks County can improve the goals against Hounslow, because that would be a real good fillip for them.
Absolutely. Berks County playing at Hill Farm Lane against CB Hounslow on Saturday. An interesting promotion race unfolding there. We thought it was going to be all about Sandhurst versus Langley, but Sandhurst are having trouble actually playing any games at the moment. They're ground sharing, obviously, with Bracknell, or rather Bracknell ground sharing with Sandhurst. And there seems to be a big fixture backlog, and Langley have had a little bit of a dip in form. So they're off top spot now, FC Deportiva Galicia there. And so Berks County may be able to take advantage of this situation, and they actually play Langley on Tuesday. So there's another game to look out for as well. Abi, I'll come to you now. What game are you looking at this weekend?
Do you want a men's game or a women's game?
Oh, go women's game. Why not?
I mean, we've already mentioned Maidenhead Keynsham, haven't we? So
Yes.
I will pick something else. I think I'm going to go for right down in the Division 3 south of the Thames Valley. Shinfield are hosting Hawley, and Shinfield are first and Hawley are second. Shinfield have got a couple of games in hand over Hawley as well, and they were promoted from the development division last season, so I think they'll be looking for a double promotion. So that should be a tasty tie, I think. Just a point in them as well. So their win, lose, and draw kind of thing are looking very similar as well. So I think that should be quite a tasty tie down in Division 3 south of the Thames Valley.
Very good. And I'll pick a women's game as well, just to, as you mentioned, we've already mentioned Keynsham versus Maidenhead, but as we've got Robbie here, I'll mention a West Berkshire side, although I don't think it's going to be very favourable fixture for them. I'm going to choose Wallingford and Crowmarsh ladies versus Newbury. That's a top versus bottom fixture. Wallingford, Crowmarsh can come very close to wrapping up that title of the Thames Valley Counties Women's League. They can't quite confirm it at the weekend, but if they win, then they're almost there. They'll have one hand on the trophy. So there's another game to keep an eye on for this weekend. Okay, well, that's about it for us this week. Thank you very much for listening. And thank you very much to our contributors for joining us this weekend. Robbie Stelling from Newbury Today, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on. It's been great.
Bob Bacon, as always, a pleasure to have you on. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Abi Ticehurst, great to have you back. And we'll definitely be seeing you next week.
Here's hoping.
Good. So until then, please keep tabs on everything, all our social media outlets for any news. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, I think even TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. We've got the lot. So just search Football in Berkshire or whatever platform you're using, or you can go to www.footballinberkshire.co.uk and you can catch up on all our articles there. But until next week, thank you very much for listening, and we will speak to you again. Goodbye.